Okay, any other questions? If not, I think we're going to jump right to David to give us an update and a look at what is new in soil moisture sensing. So 3 years ago, I was introduced to David in a company called Grow Guru. And if you're familiar with soil moisture probes in the past, they've always been a tool that we had to go out and put in the field in the spring, and then we take them back out in the fall before harvest. And you get this little piece of data that shows you what soil moisture is doing for that little bit of the growing season. And for us as a company, and for any company that's been involved in soil moisture probes, there's always an issue getting those things installed and extracted at the right time. Like, you have to be in the field and getting that done. It's always our busiest season, and we always struggle to get that done. What Grow Guru has done is they have put together a hardware package that allows you to leave the moisture probe in the field 12 months of the year, and it wirelessly communicates to a device that's above ground that can be easily moved. So David's going to go through the advantages of that, show you how it works, and some of the things that he teaches about this soil moisture probe system apply to other soil moisture probes as well, to learn how to read graphs and to learn what we're seeing when we look at soil moisture probe data. David has a little bit of an accent, but he's easily understood. He's been around long enough. So with that, we'll turn it over to David.
Okay, mic on? Yep. Yeah. You good? Okay. Yeah, if you start listening to me, I'm actually Australian. I've been living here in the US since 2009, so almost local, but I live in St. Louis. I've spent a lot of time in the Midwest, and also a lot of time in the Texas Panhandle, Southwest Kansas, that sort of region. But what I wanted to talk to you today is about what the state of the art is in soil moisture monitoring, and also how we make money out of it. I mean, why am I here? Because you guys are farmers. You take water and nutrients and in the presence of sunlight, put it through a crop and make money. And so that's what we're all about, is helping you you convert that those water and nutrients into money. And Kurt started out by saying that water is the most important factor, followed closely by nutrients. And so if we're not getting those right, not optimizing those, then we're leaving money on the table. So I want to challenge you with what is the secret of most successful farmers? Well, they think about that value, that conversion. And so when we think about that conversion, it happens in two ways. We can save money. And what's the best way to save money? Well, we want to eliminate waste. And what's the best way to make money? It's to maximize every input. So we're taking the water and nutrients, and we're really optimizing that conversion. So when you think about that water, what's the value of the water? And you think about what you've experienced. What's the difference between your driest year and your wettest year if you're a rain-fed grower? It's really, that difference is what we're talking about. And what Kurt was saying is, you're trying to add, even from an irrigated standpoint, add 100 bushels to that by really going to drip feeding nutrients and really maximizing those inputs so we can maximize the return. So that optimization only happens when everything is in balance, when it's all working like it's supposed to. And that really follows on the heels of what Kurt was saying. So when you think about that return on investment, you've got to think about it as your return on input. And so you can't maximize the investment that you've made without maximizing those return on inputs. So you're really trying to optimize that conversion rate. And of course, nature will tell us if we get it right or we get it wrong. So you can see, just the difference with water, the difference water makes. is huge. And so if you're not getting your water right and you're spending money on fertilizer, then you're not going to be making money. You're not optimizing that return. So we've got to get the water and nutrients in balance. And so how do we do that? Well, we put sensors in the ground. So all that conversion of water and nutrients happens where you can't see it. The only way of getting water and nutrients into a crop is actually through the root zone, through the root system. And that magic happens underground, and you can't see what's going on there. So you've got to put sensors in there, and those sensors are, to you as farmers, what an X-ray is to a doctor, or an MRI or an ultrasound. You've got to look inside to diagnose what's going on. You've got to look inside to see, how do I maximize that conversion rate? So what we can do is put sensors in the root zone, and we can quite simply listen to the crop. The crop will tell us when we're getting it right or wrong, rather than us trying to say, oh, this is hard, I've got to try and work out how much water this plant's using, how much nutrients I need to put on. Let's just watch and listen and let the crop be the guide. And I can tell you that whenever people have done that, put the crop in charge, they've actually really made huge gains. And you've learned so much, because if we're trying to tell the crop what to do without really knowing, the full extent of what it's capable of, we're going to come up short. So quite simply, we put a sensor in the ground sensors, and we get this trace. And so what's happening here? This is soil moisture. And so what we can see is this classic stair step. And the stair step happens because the plant drinks during the day. It takes water out of the ground. Then it flattens off at night because it rests. Then it steps during the next day and it flattens off. So what this is the heartbeat of the crop. It's the crop showing us how fast it's growing, how much water it's taking out of the soil each and every day. And so we can also see when we irrigate, soil moisture goes up. So now I've got something in the ground where all the magic happens that I can now react to. I can watch, I can learn. And so how do we do that? How do we take those learnings? Well, this is a good time to introduce the probe. And this is for any probe. So this happens to be one brand of probe that is got electronics in here. And so there are sensors. This one it's a 40-inch probe, and there are 6 sensors. There are other probes that have got a lot more sensors on them. But what we're doing is a sensor 4 inches from the top and another one 4 inches below that, and then they're every 8 inches down. And we take that, we auger a hole, and we put it in the root zone. And so we can see simultaneously what's going on with soil moisture at all those different levels. So pretty cool. So what I get is a trace, and that trace happens to be, I can see here these different lines. So that happens to be 12 inches, and that would be 16, and that would be 24, and so on, down to 48 inches down. And it's flat, and then we start to get the steps. Flat, we start to get the steps. What's going on? My roots are growing. And I can see when it starts stepping at that level that my roots happen to be active at that level. So I can now watch my roots growing. That is so cool. I don't have to guess anymore. How big's your root zone? I don't know. I think it's is it 20 inches? Is it 40 inches? Let's know. And let's know when the roots get there. So now we can actually, that's your engine. We want to actually, I can show you plenty of examples of how people get irrigation wrong and they create a shallow root zone by putting too much on too early. You want to actually work out ways of of maximizing your root zone, but that becomes my target. And so now when I'm irrigating, I can look at this same data set and I can see, oh, wow, it's stepped up because we've just put water on or it's rained. But I can see here, this blue line didn't come back to where the blue line started. So yes, water has gone in there, but it hasn't quite filled it back up again. And so I don't even need a scale on here. I don't need numbers. I can just watch the signatures. It's so easy to just watch and learn and respond. I can see over here that, hey, wow, it did come back up and my water has gone all the way down. It's pretty much filled all those levels. I can look over here and the water has gone down. It hit that orange layer, but it didn't hit this gray one down here. It might be hard to see from the back, but I can see that water has gone down. It didn't hit 40, but it hit 32 inches. And I can also work out how much it refilled all those layers. So now I can see, am I getting my water on target? I know what my target is. And am I getting water on target? So now I can actually start to read and understand and interpret where the magic happens. So where am I converting all my inputs, my water and my nutrients? So that's really cool. We can add all of those together, or we can average them, and we get a black line. Kind of hard to see from the sitting in the room here, but what is obvious is we've got different colors there. And so up here is blue because the soil can't hold any more water, and down here is red because we're too dry. And I've got a green zone in the middle, which happens to be my irrigation template. And what we're trying to do here is give you a roadmap for the whole season where I'm trying to put the right amount of water on at the right time. Because let's face it, that corn, it's when it's small, it starts out as obviously a seed, and then it grows to something that's 10 or 12 feet tall. Doesn't need the same amount of water all the way through. So we can actually tailor this to have just the right amount of water. The roots grow in, so we're increasing the amount of water we're taking out of the soil. And of course, at the back end here, it tails off because we actually want to dry the soil out. We don't want to finish with it full because we're running combines and trucks and things over it, so we don't want compaction. So we can, what we're trying to do is give you a roadmap to maximize the yield and quality, and it's based on agronomic principles. We have different templates for different crops, different soil types, and those templates, this happens to be planting is here. And because this is a permanently installed probe, we can actually go back prior to planting and make sure that we've got the right amount of moisture in the soil to set yourself up for maximum yield for that season. And the further west you go, the more you've got to rely on free irrigation to get you there. The less rainfall. This area, thankfully, nature will generally get you there. But certainly you go down to northern Texas or southwest Kansas, guys down there are putting on a lot of water right now. All the pivots are running just to prepare them to get into the season. But really what we're trying to do here is come up with a methodology that is your recipe for success. So we start out by watching and learning, and then we can take that learning and we can build it forward into a proactive management routine. And then what we want to do is lock that in. So you've got that plant factory, because that's what it is. We're taking water and nutrients, converting it into money through a plant, and it's a factory. Just the thing is, it's outside in nature, and nature is always trying to drag you off target. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too wet, it's too dry. If I know what that process is, that conversion, and I can see that I'm going off course, I can course correct. I can come in there, or I can make a financial decision because we're so far off course that I've got to actually, it's going to be a wreck. So, but you need to know that, and that's what we're trying to do, is lock in what that conversion is, so that you can know what you're doing year in, year out. So, and because you know what you're doing year in, year out, you were managing production risk. We're managing, you start out with a goal in mind, and you want to hit that goal. You want to know you've got the water in the soil to do it, and you're going to go forward and you're going to hit that yield number. So how do we do it? Well, I mentioned that we have a probe. It has a cable, and that cable, for like everything up until this point, has always been attached to a telemetry unit in the field. So we've got cable, runs along the ground, goes up to the telemetry, sends data back to the internet. And so all of this software is on the internet. So you can use it on your phone or your iPad, which I'll show you in a minute. But really what we're doing is we're measuring what's going on in the root zone there and sending it back, so we've got a live data feed. The trouble is, because it's in the field and we've got this cable and it goes from the soil surface, it's in the way of planting. It's in the way of harvest. So I've got to plant my crop, have to get a plant stand, then we have to run around like crazy putting all these sensors out, and then prior to harvest go and pull all the equipment back in again. And apart from the fact that it adds cost and you just can't get around all those sites quickly, what it does is, by pulling the probe out, I reset all of the data, all the data points. And so I showed you before that we don't even need numbers. We look at the signatures. But as soon as I pull this out, all the signatures reset. And so I have to learn all that again. Well, what we've done is taken this, and it's still got a little cable. Normally this cable would be shorter. It's got a couple of joins in it. It's just for demo purposes. But this now is the telemetry, and it goes underground, and it's wirelessly transmitting to this, which still is out in the field. It's a short communication. It's kind of like, it's not Bluetooth, but it's the similar range to Bluetooth. So it does need to be out in the field. But the really cool thing with this is that it's permanent, so I can farm straight over it. And so it goes in the ground. Yes, we have to get it below till depth, so it's going to work better if you're like a no-till farmer, or you don't till real deep. But it can work in all situations. But the cool thing about drip irrigation is that we're putting the water in 12 inches underground, and you're not plowing out your tape. So we're not plowing out the sensor either. We're putting a sensor where the water is, and of course that's where the roots and the nutrients and everything else are. So there's no cables here, and we can quite simply take the telemetry away and farm straight over it. If I can, take this away and just farm straight over the top. This logger and transmitter, we built it to last 5 years, and so that's what we're guaranteeing, a 5-year battery life. But right now we're 4 years into this, or 4.5 years in, and we're not even at half battery life. So we're expecting this to go for more than 7. Come back to me in a couple of years and I'll tell you that it'll probably go longer than that. But this goes into the ground and put it in the root zone, and we're monitoring all year. So we're not just getting it for the 3.5 months that the crop's out there and then having to pull it out and then having to relearn the data. It goes in, it stays in. We can see what's the effect of rainfall. We can see what the effect of snow melt is. We can even look at, it's measuring not just moisture, but temperature. You can look at frost lines and things like that as well. So really cool. And so let's have a look at what we can do with the data. So the other thing is too that if I take the telemetry away, this keeps logging underground. We've got 6 weeks of logging capability. So I've got plenty of time at harvest time, plenty of time at planting time, where I can have it out of the field and not lose any data as well, which is a really nice feature. So the thing about using these kinds of sensors in drip is that when you do have to install it, you want to put it in a really specific position relative to an emitter. So it goes in and it stays in, but this precise installation. So when you think about drip irrigation, you get this wetted bulb. It's kind of like a soccer ball under the ground, and the dimensions of that will depend on your flow rate. It will depend on the soil type and a few other things, but it doesn't wet all the soil all the time. And so where you place the sensor really matters. And then you learn all the signatures, and then you have to pull it out again. And by the way, to find that emitter and put it in really precisely, it's very hard to do unless you're digging up the emitter. But of course, if you've got a crop out there, that's a problem. So the solution is dig it up when there's no crop out there, and we can put it in relative to that emitter, and it goes in and it stays in and it never comes out. So we can learn exactly what that soccer ball looks like, and we can manage it. So we can learn the wetting patterns, and we get that perfect data year after year. It's very, very repeatable. So we can manage this really effectively, and you get really consistent data. And that location never changes. If I'm trying to come back with a seasonal probe and try it, I'll never find the same emitter. It'll never go in the same place relative to the emitter. So if I'm just a little bit out, if you think about this too, that when you are wetting up, you've got dry soil and wet soil, kind of like at a beach. And if you're too far down near the water, it'll stay wet all the time. If you're too far up the beach, then it'll stay dry all the time. We want to be somewhere in that wave, like where the wave action happens and it gets wet and it gets dry. And so by finding that location and keeping it there, we can really learn this and carry it forward from one year to the next. So we get that real high confidence in what we're doing. And it's impossible to get that confidence if you're taking the probe out every year and then putting it back in. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Remember I said this is to you what an X-ray is to a doctor. I don't know how to read an X-ray, but I know the answer's in there, and this might look the same to you initially. And then as we learn, we break this down, it'll all become, things become clearer. But here we are at 12 inches, 16, 24, 32, 40, and 48 inches. So we've got those traces going in the root zone. And so we've got every single day mapped out. And so we can see this is drip irrigation in Kansas. And we can see, every time we irrigate, the top three sensors, the top 2 feet are getting wet, and below that it's kind of drying out a little bit. So we can see that we're maintaining moisture in that wetted zone in that top 2 feet, and we get down to 32 inches and below, and it's over the course of the season, it's just drying the soil out a little bit. What happened at the end here is it got a lot of rainfall, so it all wet back up, which is can't help the rain, right? But it's what happened, and that's how we can really see what's going on out there. And the other cool thing is, because you've got every single day, I mean, we're getting data every 30 minutes. And so you've got that 48 readings per day. You've got all the information. So even at the end of the season, you can come back and look at this and go, hey, what really did happen? I got my yield. I can now start to digest it and say, what's my what did I get right? What did I get wrong? And we can build that into the template going forward, so that when we add all this together, we can start to look at the whole life cycle of the crop and break it down, so we can learn, and so we can actually have this progression, a little bit like what Kurt was showing with the yield progression, trying to get to 400 bushels. I guess the yield goal is probably now 500 bushels. How do we capture all the value and carry it forward? Well, it's all in here. And so, we as Grow Guru are here to help teach you through our dealers and directly with customers, how to read and interpret this. But as I'll show you with the software, we've got a lot of artificial intelligence built in. And that also works beautifully because of the data. We're not taking the probe out and resetting everything. So we can start to learn and carry that forward. So, whoa, went forward too far here. So if you think about we'll go back one, go back a couple. So this is one season, and that would happen no matter what equipment I had. So I'm going to capture that data. But really, what's the benefit of leaving it in there? So if we start to look at that, this might be one season of data from 2019, and here's another season of data from 2020, and these flip. This happens to be from Texas, where we've gone corn, cotton, corn, cotton. This could be corn, beans, whatever the rotation. But what we've got are snapshots of data that don't actually relate to each other because we've taken it out, everything resets. Well, if you put it in and leave it in, you get the movie. And that movie is so cool because you can actually see everything that happens. You can join all the dots. And what we can also see here, is that over the course of the season, I mean, corn didn't use much water at the end here. Cotton has taken a ton of moisture out. Then corn, was different. Cotton was different. So, and different years have taken out different amounts of water. But the thing that we're also getting here is watching this soil wet up. We're watching getting back to full again, because that's my yield potential. If I don't start out full, how am I going to grow the best crop I can grow? So I need to see that. And we can watch that in these signatures, where we can see here this first sensor goes up, and the next sensor, as water is applied, it's going to the next sensor down, starting to soak through to the ones below it, and it didn't hit the bottom one here. And so we can start to see that sharp peak. Why? Because water is coating the soil particles, and it coats all the soil at that upper layer, and so water can't stick anymore, so it goes to the next layer, and it starts to coat all those particles, and so it's catching here and it's soaking through. And what we can start to see is this wetting up, and then we get to the next point over here where we've now wet to the second layer, and so it can't hold anymore, and it's draining to the layers below that. So they're stepping up and holding, and now it's soaking to the layer below that, and so on and so forth. So we can start to see where these points are, and we can just know that in the data, and we can be really confident. So when we do, we have to learn this coming into the season. And so when I start to look at where we were with data, and I've been doing this for 25 years. I started commercially in 1999 with soil moisture probes. So got pretty good at understanding what happens in the season. But the reason I'm with Grow Guru is because we wanted to go beyond that and get all the data. And so what we had to do was try and guess where we were starting. And for example, if the sensors were flat, all I could say was, hey, there's no change in moisture. I don't know what's going on before that. All I can see is where we are today. So by adding in all the data at the start, I can do two things. One is I can start to learn how wet is wet. So what I showed you before with seeing those signatures of water coming up, and getting to the point where it can't hold anymore. And I learn all of that. Plus, I can actually see if I put water in down low, I know that I can take it back out again. And so I'm totally confident, rather than just coming in and putting my getting to V2, V3 and installing my sensor. I've then got to take the next several irrigation cycles or wetting events to learn that. I'm pre-calibrated coming in here. And then, of course, you get to the end of the season, and you might have made your last irrigation decision. So, hey, let's pull the equipment out because harvest is coming on. Well, if all I have to do is run around and quite literally take this out of the ground, get it out of the way of my combine, and then bring it back, and straight after the combine's been through, and stand it back up again. And what happens underground keeps logging. I get all of this data here that I can learn about the crop. I can learn how dry did it get the soil, how deep did the roots really go. I can learn, where I finished up with my soil moisture. So there is a lot of things that we've actually learned that we never knew before because we didn't know what we didn't know. We hadn't captured it. So now there's nothing missed. And so when I look at this data set, not just do I get the movie, but I get all these extra places in there that I never got before. So I got the dry down curve. I got to see what winter moisture was doing. I then can manage my pre-irrigation. I get all this extra data that previously I was missing. And so the value in that is huge. Soil moisture sensors have been great, but now we can tell the whole story and nothing's missed. And I can also start to look at how do I manage my rotations going from one to the next. And maybe I don't have enough water to actually do the rotation that I was planning on. So especially with irrigation licenses that carry over from multiple years, things like that, we can start to have a much wider time frame as well on really tracking where the water goes. So also, when you think about what you're missing, if you're growing cover crops, now you can really know whether how to manage those. If you were if you're double cropping, going from one crop straight into the next, you can manage that, and presumably one crop left the soil a little dry, so now I've got to wet that up. And then with soil health, if I'm watching where the water goes, that's affected by soil structure. And so same with root depth. So I can start to, if roots aren't going very deep, I might have a hard pan, a compaction or something like that. So if I go out there and I do something to fix my my hard pan, then I can have a look the next year and see, oh yeah, I fixed that. So there's a lot of information that's really, really valuable here. So I'm coming back to this slide because that was what we were looking at before with drip irrigation, but now we can pan back, and that happened to be this data here. But now I've got multiple years of data, and I can also see that, we didn't actually know how wet was until we got to the third year here. And that's because there was a wheat crop, and they were watering the wheat pretty heavily. And what happened with the wheat is that it's really hard to see there, but actually put more water into the subsoil. So kind of overwatering the wheat a little bit, but they're building up the subsoil, which the corn crop had. But it was only over the course of time that we experienced all those different soil moisture conditions. So we can actually capture that and learn more about what your growing environment. I'm going to whip through these because it's pretty quick, and I don't want to keep you from lunch. I can be pretty quick. I just wanted to point out that the fact that it's year-round data, and that you can manage all the cover crops and other things. So all the things that we can do with permanent installation that you can't do with a seasonal installation. Pretty cool. The software, I mentioned that it's all on the internet. So what we're doing is we're putting that power of profit in the palm of your hand. So that whole return on inputs, watching where the water and your nutrients go, it's right there, and it's in real time. And those colored, like the irrigation templates, as I mentioned, this is your conversion of that inputs into money. Well, we've got that roadmap, but I also mentioned it's a factory. And so like any factory, you've got a control room where you've got a bunch of lights. And I want to know that everything is on track. It's following the right process. So what we can do is give you, well, basically everything either in a map lots of circles because this is northern Texas, all pivots. But if I look at the list here, we can actually see this is like my colored lights in my factory. If I'm a busy person or I'm a consultant and I've got hundreds of sites to look at, I can see this by exception. Hey, we're green, we're green, we're green. But suddenly I've got a yellow or a red light on my bank of lights here in my factory. Hey, I better jump on this. Something's going wrong. I'm going off track. So I can actually see, I can expand that out. And this is where I said you don't need to be the doctor and read the x-ray. You can just look at, because we've got this beautiful data stream, we've actually built into the software the ability for us to tell you how deep the roots are going in a picture. We've developed the ability to tell you how deep the water is penetrating in a picture. And we've got little gas gauges all the way down. So these roots now are down to 24 inches. And it's dried out the soil quite a lot at 24 inches, but there's moisture underneath it. So I can see in a picture very easily and clearly what I would also see on a graph. The graph is something that most of you will want to learn how to read and interpret, but you don't have to. So, and of course, we've got a large range of crops. You can count on one hand. You throw in wheat as well, and you've pretty much got what's grown in the Midwest, which is really really handy. And so, just to summarize, what we're trying to do is teach you how to listen to your crop. We've got the tool. Now the crop can talk to you and you can listen. And if you give the crop what it needs, it's going to reward you. And that's the key thing here. So your water is your most valuable resource, closely followed by nutrients. And that's what we're tracking. If you see where the water goes and you're putting nutrients on in the water, like into the water, then you can also track your nutrients as well. So by tracking that, we can really get that return on input. We can maximize your return on your investment for your drip irrigation, your sensors as well. We can really teach you how that crop is growing. If you're listening to the crop, you can understand your farming system, and you can understand it over multiple crops, over rotations, and so you can actually become a better farmer. And so you lock in what works. What we're trying to do is learn in the first year and sort of make some changes in the second year. So by the third year, you should be really humming along and you've got that whole system optimized. And of course, by knowing what works and locking that in, we're managing your production risk. So it's not a guess. It's not saying, you know what, is it going to be a good year or a bad year? You've now got the ability to make every year a good year and to push the bar, raise the bar, and lock that in. So, that's what we're trying to do, is maximize every input. And that's, from here on, I'll take questions. Yeah. I can see they're setting up lunch. Yep. So the question was, what happens above the sensor? Like if we buried the probe, where the top 12 inches, let's say, it matters, but then there's a trade-off. It's much better to know what's going on deeper down, and especially if I'm using drip, and that's where I'm applying. What you'll see is if I get rainfall above, all the water use on those lower sensors stops, right? If it's pulling moisture from above, it stops using moisture from below. So you'll see it without seeing it. And really what you're trying to do is affect, the engine room, which is where you're putting your water and nutrients. And so, a lot of people say, well, that top foot really matters. Yeah, it does. But if you're not getting water, even with a pivot, if you're not getting water down 12 or 16 or 20 inches, then you're not farming properly. You've got to work out how to do that. And so, those roots, and a lot of people say, hey, I'm only growing my roots on in the top 2 feet. Well, I challenge you that you're wasting an opportunity to grow a high yielding crop. You should be getting your roots down 4 or 5 feet. And there's guys down in Texas now, which is a different environment, I'll grant you that if they don't get their roots down 6 or 7 feet, then they're not trying hard enough. They've realized that that's part of the engine room, and they're growing high yielding crops on 4 gallons per acre per minute, like high yielding as in 270, 280 bushels. And that's because they're using all the groundwater to supplement their irrigation. Does that answer the question? You won't see it though. If you get a 1/2 inch rain and you think about the soil holding 2 inches per foot, and you've taken out half of that, it'll get caught in the top, and so you won't see it as a wetting up, but you will see it as the crop not using the moisture lower down. Other questions?
One couple things I'd add to that. How deep we place the sensor is really up to you. Like if you're only tilling at 6, let's put the top of it at 6. Like there's no reason that we have to go down to 12. The other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, we can connect a shallow sensor to this device that you could take in and out.
Yeah.
So if you were really set on, hey, I want a 0 to 12 inch reading, we can add another sensor that you could simply install and extract yourself.
And yeah, but it has a cable, so you have to put it in, like you come back after planting and then you establish, plug it in. There's an input, you run a cable, put a sensor in, and where farmers have started doing that in year 1, year 2, they've kind of done it. By year 3, they've gone, I don't need it anymore. And the other thing is too that cable can get chewed by critters, it gets cut. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about putting the probe underground. It's safe and it just keeps chugging along, and it really works. You put something above ground, it becomes a target for everything out there, the sprayers and combines and stuff like that. I will say that there is no T-post. It's all plastic. We've had these go through combines. It's not going to break your combine. It's going to cost you money because you've got to fix it. But at least it's all plastic. So, yeah.
So cost, and I don't know all of them off the top of my head, roughly $2,200 for the initial hardware, and then the subscription is $395, I believe. So a little bit more money up front, but then you don't have that $300 every year to take it in and out. So over time, it's cheaper than anything that we have right now. Yep. Don? How many acres you cover? Good question.
Yeah. So I guess I'll repeat it for the internet. How many acres does it cover? It's how many decisions do you have to make? It's information to make a decision. So how many management units do you have? And the best example I've thought of is an air conditioner with a thermostat, right? That air conditioner might cover your whole house and you've got 8 or 10 rooms, but you've got one thermostat. Just like your field might have 3 or 4 different soil types, but you're making one decision. I'm going to put an irrigation, which may be an inch, it may be half an inch, it may be 2 inches, but that's my one decision. So what you have to do is put the sensor, the probe, in a location where it maximizes the value, just like a thermostat. So you're going to put that thermostat in an area where you spend most of the time. You're going to put it at sort of shoulder height or whatever, of chest height, because if you put it too high on the wall, it's going to get too hot and it's going to make the house too cold. If you put it down low, it's going to be too cold and it'll make the house too hot. You've got to think of it like that. Now, if I suddenly break up my house and I put a second air conditioner in the bedrooms or the second level, I need 2 thermostats. Just like if I'm now making 2 decisions because I'm splitting my field into corn and beans or something else, I need to now have 2 probes because I'm making 2 decisions. Where people have gone to variable rate, and that's with a pivot, and you're speeding up, slowing down. You may you'd start out with one in a representative location, and then you say, I'm going to go plus 20%, minus 20%. But you might want to go, hey, I want to put one in the wettest part and one in the driest part, so now I can manage in between. It just depends on the decisions that you're trying to make. There was another.
Jim?
Okay. But, so if you've got 80 acres of drip or whatever it is, then you'd have one for 80 acres, unless you're trying to split plant that. Yeah. So what about different soil types? You want to put it in the main soil type. So let's say, you've got 3 soil types and half the field is one, and you've got 25% and 25%, heavier and lighter. I'd go in the main soil type because that's the thing you're trying to maximize. But that said, it's whatever. It could be tricky. You want to be careful where you place sensors. You don't want to place them where water gathers or where water runs off as well. So that slope and aspect does matter, but you're trying to look after the part that pays. Because like if I was in a pivot scenario, I always want to be on the outside of the pivot, because that outside, if you think the outside half the outside quarter is half the area. And so if you've got 8 spans, the 2 spans on the outside actually walk half the area. So you want to be on the outside just because of that. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But we do take placement very carefully. It is, if you get it in the wrong spot and it's a small area of the field, then you're going to be managing to that. It could be at the detriment of the rest of the field. And so, yeah, there's a lot of techniques we can use. I mean, obviously measuring soil variability is the key. And if you've got EM surveying through an EM38 sled or a Veris card or something like that, that's a really good place to start to look at soil variability. There's the Sergo maps as well. Some people trust them, some people don't. It's really depends on where you are. But yes, you want to put it in the part that pays. Yeah, great question. How close do we have to put these? If I'm in a corn crop and I'm going 10 feet in the air, because it's a radio system or a cellular system, but either or, you've got to get it up. There's no solar panel and it runs on 2 D-cell batteries, by the way. But if I'm getting 10 feet in the air, I need to be about 6 feet away from it. If I'm down at this sort of height, I can actually go a little further. So if I'm in a short statured crop like wheat or soybeans or something like that, I could probably get more like 15 feet away. But I said it's kind of like Bluetooth. It's just a near field communication. Great question. What kind of artificial intelligence is coming? The beautiful thing is that we've now got data that we've never had before. And so we can do with it things that we could never do before. And I will tell you that it is the forerunner to automation. So once we've got a really nice long data stream, we can be really confident in the answers that we're getting. And so we don't have to learn this. Plus, we've also got time to set up the API linkages that you need, like the interactions with other software. So if I know that it's going to be in there for the next 5, 7, 8 years, it's worthwhile connecting it to all the systems, where previously, hey, I'm still installing the first ones, the last ones, or my first ones are sort of halfway through the season, and it was too much of a rush to get everything linked together. So what are the API things? I can see, definitely working towards automation, but we're not there yet. And so you've got to get that history. You need to get probably into your second season is when you start to want to join the dots. But you're also going to want to have multiple sensors. It's a bit like if I'm in a self-driving car. I don't just want to put my life in the hands of one sensor. I want redundancy, and so you're probably going to want 4 or 5 or 6 probes per field, and so there are some things that we've got coming that will help with that from a scalability standpoint, from a cost standpoint, all the rest of it. So watch this space.